Violet and Xander slowly descended the stairs in their mother Ursula's house, who was calling them. In the hallway stood a man with a suitcase whom they both hated. "Violet, Xander, say hello to David," she said excitedly. "As I've already told you, he's going to be part of our family now." "Mom," Violet replied contemptuously, "you're not even divorced from Dad yet." "Well, fortunately, I will soon," their mother replied firmly, unhappy that her children did not share her enthusiasm. "Don't you think this is a bit tacky?" Violet continued, unwilling to give up. "Violet," Ursula snapped at her daughter. "Is that his car?" Xander asked, looking through the open door at the nondescript but familiar vehicle parked outside the entrance. "I thought you said this guy was successful. Dad bought himself a Mercedes SUV, the top model. Cool car." "It's good to see you again, kids," David said awkwardly after Xander's unflattering comparison with his father. "Yeah, I want to change my car too. I'm getting a promotion soon, so we'll all be driving expensive cars soon." Neither Violet nor Xander looked impressed. A tense silence hung in the air. "Welcome to our home, David," Ursula hissed at her children, boiling with anger at their rudeness. "Yes, whatever you say," Violet said unkindly, and both children went upstairs. "They just need a little time to get used to it," Ursula reassured the puzzled David when the children returned to their rooms. "I'll talk to them. They'll understand." 6 months earlier, 16-year-old Violet and 12-year-old Xander had been told about their parents' separation when they found out about their mother's infidelity. This came after 2 years of watching their parents argue, their mother's coldness toward their father Gary, her accusations against him, her regular weekend and vacation trips with friends and relatives, visits to relatives, and any other excuse to leave for the night. It got to the point where even they didn't believe their mother. It hurt them to see their father lose his self-respect, desperately trying to save his marriage. The parents turned to a marriage counselor, but David was never able to completely leave their lives. When their mother was away, the children heard their father crying at night. 2 years later, Gary finally couldn't take it anymore. He found evidence of her affair and filed for divorce, naming David in the papers. Both parents sat down with the children to explain why they were separating. Xander cried, while Violet looked at her mother with poorly concealed hostility. Ursula refused to look the children in the eye, sitting in front of them with anxiety and obvious anger. She tried to place equal blame on their father, but it had no effect because she was the only one who believed it. All she could say was that she had fallen in love with someone else. Then followed 3 agonizing months while Gary looked for a place to live. When he finally moved out, it was almost a relief. But it didn't make life at home any more pleasant. Both Violet and Xander felt enormous anger toward their mother, who was too preoccupied with David to notice. After Gary left and the divorce proceedings began, the relationship between him and Ursula became very tense, as there was no love left between them. Gary filed for full custody of the children and the house. Ursula did not give up and demanded alimony, the house for which Gary had to pay the mortgage, and the right to visit Violet and Xander only under supervision. The divorce lasted 6 months. The judge, who was unimpressed by the case, handed down a decision that satisfied no one. Gary still had to pay half of the mortgage until Ursula remarried, as well as child support. Custody was complicated by the age difference between the children. Violet was considered old enough to choose which parent she wanted to live with, but Xander was not. It was decided that Xander would live in the family home with Ursula on weekdays and spend weekends with his father. Violet reluctantly agreed to this for her brother's sake. She cried in her father's arms when she told him about it. Gary, also in tears, told his daughter how proud he was of what she was doing for her brother. Their parents' divorce brought Violet and Xander closer together, especially since Violet was forced to take care of her brother while their mother continued her affair with David. A month after their parents' separation, Ursula invited Violet and Xander to dinner so they could meet David for the first time. The children quickly realized who David was. "Violet, Xander, this is David, the man I'm dating," Ursula said proudly to her children, squeezing David's hand. "You mean the guy you cheated on Dad with?" Violet asked contemptuously. Xander slumped in his chair, crossed his arms, and turned away sullenly. "Violet!" Ursula said sharply, looking around to see if any of the restaurant patrons had heard her daughter. "It's okay, Ursula." David smiled awkwardly, but he didn't like Violet's contemptuous directness. "It's a shame your mom and I didn't meet under different circumstances, but when you're older, you'll understand that love doesn't always work out the way you want it to." "Yes, Dad learned that the hard way," Violet replied. Anger flashed across David's face, and Ursula struggled to contain her rage. "Xander, I hear you're a pretty good baseball player," David said cheerfully, trying to change the subject. "Yeah, not bad," Xander replied, without even looking at David. "Maybe we could go to a game sometime?" David suggested with a smile. "That would be great, wouldn't it, Xander?" Ursula agreed cheerfully. "Thanks, David." "You're welcome," was all Xander said. David and Ursula's smiles disappeared. The atmosphere at the table became tense due to Violet's hostility, Xander's sullen mood, David's disappointment, and Ursula's hidden anger. Dinner was silent, and the children, who wanted to leave as soon as possible, refused dessert. "That was very rude of you," Ursula said angrily to the children as she drove them home. "David tried very hard to get to know you, and you showed him disrespect in public." "I don't like him," Xander said from the back seat. "I can't believe you left Dad for him," Violet added. "Dad is much better than him." Ursula wiped away a tear and began to get visibly upset. "If you just give him a chance, you'll love him as much as I do. He's such a wonderful person." Neither Violet nor Xander responded, staring indignantly out the car window. When they got home, Violet and Xander immediately went to their rooms, leaving their mother in tears on the phone, apologizing to David for their behavior. "Dad, you can't be happy," Violet cried desperately to her father when she told him about her meeting with David. "You can't tell Mom that we don't want to meet him." "No, I'm not happy about it," Gary replied irritably, then softened his tone to calm his daughter. "But this day had to come. There's nothing I can do about it unless he hurts you. If I know your mother, you'll be seeing him even more often. Listen, I'm not going to punish you for your behavior toward him. That's your mother's business." Gary's intuition was right. Ursula had convinced herself that the more Violet and Xander saw David, the more they would love him. It was inevitable. David was too wonderful a man for that not to happen. David began coming over for dinner and staying the night. Despite his best efforts, conversation was kept to a minimum. He bought gifts, which were carelessly discarded and disappeared after David left. Ursula later found them in the trash can, still in their boxes, unopened. Ursula even invited David and his parents over, calling them Violet and Xander's adoptive grandparents. To her great disappointment and confusion, Violet and Xander still refused to talk to them. "Violet, Xander, I need to talk to you," Ursula said firmly to her children. Inside, she was boiling. Their behavior was abnormal. She had tried so hard to bring David into her children's lives, but they stubbornly refused. She was convinced that Gary was pushing them to behave this way. "I need to understand why you're acting this way toward David. He's been very kind to you, but you won't give him a chance. Why? Did your father tell you to do this?" "Dad said it's your problem, not his. He doesn't want to know about it," Violet replied sharply. "Anyway, we don't like David for what he did to Dad. I can't believe you're making us talk to him." "Violet, David and I love each other. You have to accept that," Ursula replied, sounding annoyed. "He's going to be part of your lives, whether you like it or not." Ursula immediately regretted her words. "So you're still forcing us to accept him," Violet said, and Ursula realized that her fears were justified. "No one is forcing anyone. David is going to be part of our family." I just want you to accept him. Let him make you as happy as he makes me, she said, almost begging in desperation. It still sounds like you're forcing us. You have to accept that we don't like him and never will. What about you, Xander? Are you saying you don't like David either? Ursula asked her son reproachfully. Xander just shook his head slowly in disgust. I just don't want to know him. Ursula simply couldn't understand her children. Why were they behaving like this? She felt irritated and disappointed. Her sex life with David was suffering because of it. The only time they enjoyed sex was on weekends when Violet and Xander were with their father. It seemed that everything was much better when she was still married. The more she thought about it, the more she became convinced that Gary was behind it all. After talking to the children, she made sure that Gary could see David when he picked up or dropped off the children. She wanted him to see that she, David, and the children were a happy family and that he couldn't break them up. At first, she was pleased to see that seeing David had an effect on Gary, but then he himself began to look happier and more relaxed. She tried to send David to Gary to pick up the children out of spite, but the children refused to get into his car, and Gary had to drive them home. All Ursula could think about was how to get David to move in with them. He was much more reluctant than she had expected. Despite the problems with the children, she thought everything was fine between them. And there they stood. David with his suitcase and belongings in his dreary car, rejected again by Violet and Xander, while Ursula comforted him. If Ursula thought that David moving in with them would make Violet and Xander accept him, she was sorely mistaken. The already tense atmosphere in the house became even more tense. Violet and Xander still refused to talk to David. Mealtimes were silent. When David tried to strike up a conversation, Violet and Xander waited in awkward silence until he got the hint and left. Offers to play with Xander were rejected, and offers to teach Violet to drive were met with a sharp, "That's my father's job." Any attempts to integrate David into the family were simply ignored. Even when Violet and Xander were forced to socialize with the whole family, including David, it didn't work. Soon, David began to complain and suggest that Violet and Xander spend more time with their father. In a rage, Ursula couldn't take it anymore, and when Gary picked up the children from his ex-wife's house, she lashed out at him. "Gary, you need to talk to the kids about how they're treating David," she said angrily. "Whatever you tell them, you have to stop. What do you want me to do?" Gary shrugged. "You brought this jerk into their lives, not me. I know what you're doing. You have to stop or I'll go to court and get you banned from seeing Xander and Violet." "You're crazy," Gary laughed, not believing his ears. "You cheated on me with him, and now you're complaining that they don't accept your jerk boyfriend. Maybe a relationship that started with cheating wasn't such a good idea?" Violet and Xander are good kids. They know right from wrong. They can form their own opinions. They don't need me telling them what to do. They're old enough to make their own decisions. What happens between them and David is none of my business. Ursula glared at her ex-husband and went back into the house. The vacation had only been successful because Violet and Xander had left together, leaving Ursula and David alone. This gave their fading relationship a boost. Gary's indifference to David and Ursula's relationship soon became apparent. During dinner, after Gary had driven Violet and David home, Violet and Xander began to discuss Gary's new girlfriend animatedly. She had dropped by Gary's place unannounced while he was busy, and the children were home alone, unaware that she was there. The unexpected encounter went surprisingly well. A nervous Gary arrived to find his children and girlfriend in conversation. After a few awkward questions and Gary's assurances that his girlfriend already knew about them, how his marriage to their mother had ended, and that she was making him happy, the children hugged her. Ursula could have screamed with rage listening to this. They hadn't mentioned David's name in almost 6 months, but after one unplanned encounter, their father's new girlfriend was welcomed with open arms by his children. Despite all the problems, Ursula was determined to prove that her relationship with David was successful. She became active on social media, She posted photos of herself and David hugging and smiling, telling the world how lucky she was. There were photos of her with the children, photos of David at children's events, Xander's baseball games, and Violet's soccer games. She desperately tried to portray David as a loving stepfather to her children. But you can't pretend forever. Xander's birthday became the catalyst for a fight. She threw him a birthday party at their house, putting a lot of effort and money into it. Not only were Xander's friends invited, but their parents and siblings were invited as well. Ursula also invited David's family and started calling David's nephews and nieces Xander and Violet's cousins. Much to Ursula's disappointment, Xander insisted that Gary be invited, and Gary insisted that he be allowed to help with the party preparations. Xander had a wonderful time. So did Violet, who knew many of Xander's friends' older brothers and sisters. The problem was Gary. Ursula was thrilled to introduce David to all of Xander's friends' parents, but Gary had known them for a long time, and they were all very interested in how he was doing. David felt increasingly isolated in his own home. David's entire family was given a cold reception by Ursula's children. Xander completely ignored David. He refused to take pictures with him, but took many pictures with his father, and the parents at the party began to notice. Gary ruined the party she had so carefully organized. Then David did what Ursula considered the most amazing thing. He got down on one knee and proposed to her with a ring she didn't know about. Ursula was so surprised that she couldn't believe it and cried with happiness. She was sure that there was applause after the proposal. It was truly the happiest day of her life. She insisted that the four of them have their picture taken. If there were any negative comments, she didn't hear them. She, David, Violet, and Xander were going to officially become a family. If Violet and Xander were unhappy about Ursula and David's upcoming wedding, they didn't show it. It seemed that David had done everything he could. Their attitude toward David had changed. They started talking to him, spending time alone with him, and even smiling in his presence. The tense atmosphere of the past few months had evaporated. Ursula felt that they had become the family she had dreamed of since she first met David. In her delirium, Ursula saw no reason to postpone the wedding. It was scheduled for the beginning of summer vacation so that Gary could pick up the children and she and David could go on their honeymoon. She wanted to get married right after the divorce, but there were practical issues with the children's education. The only thing that clouded her joy was Gary's indifference. All she got from him was an emotionless congratulations with a shrug. He really was worthless. Divorcing him was the best decision of her life. Everything leading up to the wedding had been perfect. The preparations went smoothly. All the guests confirmed their attendance. The wedding day was sunny and warm. Nothing foreshadowed that anything could go wrong. A few weeks before the wedding, the children began to change. Ursula couldn't understand what was going on. They seemed nervous and excited. It was as if they couldn't wait for something to happen. She decided it was because of the wedding and the fast-approaching school holidays. It made sense. A wedding is an important event, and they had important roles to play. Xander was supposed to walk her down the aisle, and Violet was the maid of honor. Ursula wanted her father to walk her down the aisle, but although they were planning to come to the wedding, they didn't like David. Ursula loved helping Violet with her dress. Xander seemed happy choosing his wedding suit with David. The wedding was to take place at a nearby resort hotel overlooking a lake. The grounds were beautiful and perfect for photos. Ursula was more excited than she had ever been in her life. During the wedding rehearsal, Ursula noticed that Violet and Xander were smiling a lot at each other. It seemed like they were up to something, but throughout the rehearsal, the happy faces they had shown in previous months seemed to disappear. They refused to smile and seemed uninterested in what was going on. They had to be told several times to do what they were asked. They were constantly whispering and laughing, disrupting the rehearsal. Ursula felt anger rising within her, but they had an unexpected defender in David. "Relax, they're just kids. They're probably just nervous or excited," he said to her. David was right, of course. Violet and Xander had now fully accepted him, so why would they behave badly? The wedding day began perfectly. Ursula and Violet went to have their hair and nails done and their makeup applied. Mother and daughter looked beautiful. The caterers arrived on time, as did the flowers. The problems began just before the ceremony. Xander was missing. Violet went to look for her brother and didn't come back. Ursula paced back and forth in front of the small hotel chapel. All the guests were waiting inside. David was waiting. Where were her children? She couldn't get married without them. "Where were you?" she asked angrily when they returned. "Xander, where's your boutonniere?" Xander looked down and smiled. "I must have left it in the room." Violet struggled to suppress a laugh. "This isn't funny," Ursula said sharply. "Xander, go and get it now," she shouted. Xander looked at his mother in surprise and, frightened by her anger, turned and ran back to the room. Ursula began to get nervous. Everything was perfect, and she wasn't going to let anything go wrong. One of the ushers slipped out of the chapel to check that everything was in order. "My son forgot his boutonniere," she said, laughing and rolling her eyes. "Boys!" She wasn't laughing inside. 15 minutes later, Xander returned with the boutonniere in his hand. Ursula snatched it from him and pinned it on herself. She buttoned the top button of his shirt, adjusted his tie, and buttoned the top button of his jacket. "Seriously, Xander, you're 13 years old. You should be able to dress yourself," she said irritably to her son. "Try to stay that way for the rest of the day." She took Xander by the hand and forced herself to smile. "Okay, Violet, let's go." Violet opened the chapel door and led her mother and brother down the aisle. In her excitement, she didn't notice that Violet and Xander weren't smiling. When Ursula reached the end of the aisle, she smiled at David with a happy and excited smile, silently saying, "Hello." She kissed both of her children, who took their places in front. The brother and sister began whispering until the priest cleared his throat and looked sternly at them, causing everyone in the chapel to laugh. The officiant began the ceremony. He spoke about how radiant Ursula looked, how happy Ursula and David were, and how lucky Violet and Xander were to have David become part of their family. Ursula and David smiled at Violet and Xander in response to his words. The children smiled back at them. Then their friends stood up and said what a beautiful couple Ursula and David were and how well they suited each other. All the tension Ursula had been feeling disappeared, and she was filled with happiness. Before the exchange of vows, the priest announced, "In accordance with state law, I must ask if there is anyone who objects to the marriage of Ursula and David." The room fell silent. There were one or two nervous giggles, and then Violet and Xander jumped up from their seats and shouted in unison, "We object!" Ursula turned and looked at her children in horror. The waiter almost took a step back in surprise, and there were several audible sighs among the guests. David just stared straight ahead, slowly shaking his head and laughing in disbelief. "Violet, Xander, what are you doing? This isn't funny!" Ursula's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't believe what her children had done on the happiest day of her life, of their entire lives. Violet stood up for herself and Xander, explaining to the guests why she didn't agree. "Most of you were probably wondering why Mom and David got married so quickly and why they moved in together so soon after Mom divorced Dad. The truth is, they had been dating for almost 2 years while Mom was still married to Dad. Mom cheated on Dad with David." "David, is that true?" David's parents asked, sounding horrified. David didn't answer or even turn around. Indignant whispers filled the room. "Silence!" Ursula hissed at Violet as panic began to take hold of her. This was turning into a nightmare. Most of the guests had no idea. It wasn't something she or David wanted to brag about. "We hate David. He's to blame for our parents' divorce," Xander continued. "Our dad cried all the time because our mom was with David. We had to live with them while our mom was dating David. And then our mom made us accept him. We don't want David to marry Mom. We don't want David to be our stepfather. We don't want to live with David. And we don't even want to know David. Mom, if you marry David, we want to live with Dad. Violet almost yelled at her mother. Violet, what are you saying? Please don't do this, both of you, Ursula begged her children. Turning to David, she said, Give me a minute. I'll talk to them and sort everything out. David shook his head and said almost calmly to his fiancée, Hell no! I've had enough. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life putting up with daily insults from these little brats. They don't love me and they never will, and you know what? I don't love them either. I've spent too much time and money on them, and all I get in return is disrespect. I'll marry you if you choose me over them. Ursula fell silent and looked at David as if she could never do what he was asking her to do. I knew it, he said, and started to walk away. Ursula desperately grabbed his arm. David, we can fix this. No, we can't, because nothing is broken. This is just reality, David said, and walked out of the chapel. Tears streamed from Ursula's eyes. Black streaks of mascara ran down her face as she watched her fiancé walk out of her life. Why? Why did you do this to me? She asked her children in despair. We hate you for what you did to Dad, Xander replied coldly. And you made us live with the man you cheated on Dad with. Who does that? Violet asked, looking furious. You made Dad's life and our lives miserable. Ursula suddenly saw the light. All the time she had been with David, she had never thought about how her actions might affect her children. After separating from Gary, she was sure they would love David. How could they not? But they didn't, and they never would. She had destroyed her relationship with the two people she loved most, and they might never love her again. Ursula just stared at her children and collapsed on the floor, sobbing, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know you felt that way. I didn't think it would turn out like this. I love you. Please, I love you, she said, reaching out to them in the empty chapel. She wanted them to hug her. Violet and Xander didn't approach their mother. They frowned and began to look upset as well. Their plan had achieved its goal, but they hadn't expected their mother to turn into a pathetic, broken figure standing in front of them. Violet, do you have a phone? Her grandmother asked gently. Violet nodded and took out her purse to show her grandmother. You and Xander go to your rooms and get changed. Call your father and tell him to come and pick you up. You'll have to stay with him for a while. But Mom? Violet asked anxiously, looking at her sobbing mother, and guilt squeezed her chest. Don't worry about Mom. We'll take care of her. I'll call your father tonight and explain what happened. You'll be able to see your mother in a few days when she's calmed down. I'm sorry. We didn't expect this to happen. We thought she would just be angry with us, Violet said, looking upset. Grandma hugged the two stunned children, and Grandpa gently helped his daughter up from the floor and led her out of the chapel. She kept looking back at her children, who were now also crying openly. There's no need to apologize. Your grandfather and I never liked David either, and we didn't approve of your mother's behavior toward your father. The consequences of her actions toward you and your father are now becoming clear, and it will be a hard blow for her. In the long run, it will be for the best, but in the immediate future, life will be very difficult. She needs to earn your forgiveness, and she needs to understand what made you do what you did. She will have to rebuild a loving relationship with your father and learn to respect him again as the father of her children. She did a terrible thing. I doubt your father will ever be able to forgive her. Your mother has a long road ahead of her to heal and learn about herself. It may take years of therapy. I love you, Violet. I love you, Xander. Don't worry, everything will be okay. Your grandfather and I will always be here for you. Now let's go home. The two children left with their grandmother without looking back.